Hi, everyone. I'm Vanessa Weisberg, the new director of the Celiac Disease Program at Boston Children's Hospital, and I'm so excited to be starting a monthly research briefing for all of you. We all know that medical journal articles can be a little bit hard to understand sometimes, so I'm really excited that we have Dr. Jocelyn Silvester here to decode all of the science. This month's research paper was published in the journal Microbiome, and it was conducted by a team of researchers at Massachusetts General Hospital. The paper today was showcasing some of the findings from the CD-GEM study, which is one of the first long-term multi-center studies to look at celiac disease from birth through childhood. So, Dr. Silvester, let's start with the basics. The paper's title is Multi-Omics Analysis Reveals the Influence of Genetic and Environmental Risk Factors on Developing Gut Microbiota in Infants at Risk of Celiac Disease. That is certainly a mouthful. Can you tell us what is this paper about and what were the researchers looking at?
Absolutely, and I think that it is a mouthful because there's a lot going on in this paper, and there's very specific questions that it's answering, and very specific questions that it's not answering. And so you mentioned that this is a study looking at infants at risk of celiac disease, sort of prospectively, so recruiting them at birth and then following what happens over time instead of finding them after they have celiac disease and then trying to figure out what happened before. And so that's why they get to do this multi-omics part of it, because they have different types of samples, which means they can look at different types of signals in these samples and they can follow them over time. And so what's exciting about this study is how they use the samples and also the question they looked at. So one of the things that's really unknown is why some people develop celiac disease and some people don't. And it's hypothesized that there's certain risk factors, such as cesarean section, or whether you're breastfed or formula fed, or whether you have exposure to antibiotics early on. And the thought is that these affect you through your microbiome, which is a term which refers to all of the all of the bacteria and microbia that live on your body. We usually use it shorthand, talking just about the intestine, and in this context, it is just the intestine. And so they have moved the field forward because instead of just looking and seeing, okay, what bacteria are there, they've actually done a further omics and looked at what these bacteria are actually doing. So they've looked at what genes these bacteria are making, and then they've also done metabolomics to look at what types of compounds they're actually making, because ultimately your body and metabolism work based on how much of different types of chemicals you have, and that's what the bacteria are doing, is affecting the chemicals in your body.
All right, so let's just go a little bit further back. Can you tell us what is the microbiome and what does it actually do for us?
Yes, so the microbiome is the collection of all the microbes that live on your body, which is really your body surfaces inside and out. So skin, eyes, every orifice, your intestine. And this consists of viruses, funguses, bacteria, and there's also some phages, which are viruses that affect bacteria.
So the study looked at three things and their effect on babies. They looked at birth delivery mode, they looked at how an infant was fed, whether they were breastfed or formula fed, and antibiotic exposure. Did any of this matter?
Matter for what?
Developing celiac disease, changing of the microbiome.
So this study does not actually look at risk of developing celiac disease, which is what's really important, is that at the end of the study, it's in infants at risk of developing celiac disease. So these infants, we know that they're HLA-DQ2 or DQ8, meaning that they're at risk for celiac disease genetically, but we don't actually know which, if any, of these infants ultimately develop celiac disease. The samples were all taken in the first 6 months of life, so before solid food introduction. And so this gives an idea of how different environmental factors shape your microbiome, which in turn shapes how you metabolize food and how your body functions.
So did any of those three things change the way that the microbiome looked?
Yes. So, and what's interesting is that most previous studies have really looked at doing almost like a census and saying, okay, how many proteobacteria are there? How many Clostridia are there? And this study actually went one step further, which is why it's called a multi-omics study, to look at what they were actually doing. And so they were able to show that there were certain metabolites that had significantly different levels based on whether or not you had a cesarean section or not, or whether or not you were exposed to antibiotics or not. And this is important because it starts to help us think about a mechanism whereby these risk factors, which have been postulated to be important in celiac disease and a lot of other, particularly autoimmune diseases, might actually have an effect, because sometimes it is hard to make a link between how you're born and when you develop, why you develop celiac disease when you're 10.
Got it. So as you said, this paper doesn't help us better predict celiac disease in babies who are born from a mother who has celiac disease. But what does it help us understand, and how is this study going to continue going on to help us learn those things?
So this study is really a beginning look, almost like a first peek at what is going on in the intestine and how these different factors affect that and the long-term effects. And so it helps potentially to understand the different things that are going on and how those differences might ultimately affect your risk of getting celiac disease. So there's still a few steps to go. And I think it's really important to highlight that this is really a massive project. There's thousands of samples, there's hundreds of infants, and we are going to learn a lot from this project. And this is really just like dipping our first little toenail in the water of what we're going to learn from this study. So our colleagues at Mass General have done a fantastic job of really building something that's going to help us to learn. And this is really one of the first building blocks.
Well, it is certainly a very exciting study, and I know that you and I are both really excited to see what comes out of it in the future. So thank you so much, Dr. Silvester, for joining us today for this briefing, and we will bring you lots more interesting papers in the months ahead.